Margot Bloomstein, you have been a brand and content strategy for more than 20 years. Wow, that's a lot of experience. You are a professional speaker, and you give workshops all over the world on content strategy. This is your second book. You wrote a previous book called Content Strategy at Work. You teach content strategy at a graduate program at Johanneum University in Graz, Austria. And today we're here to talk about your latest book, Trustworthy, How the Smartest Brand Beats Cynicism and Bridge the Gap, the Trust Gap. Margot, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
So, wow, that's a lot of experience on content and strategy. You must know the ins and out of how we define a brand. And I'm sure you know who is doing it right, who's doing it wrong, and what they can do to improve their brand. I wonder if you could start by telling us a little bit about your background. How do you get into this business?
Sure. Well, yeah, as you said, I've been working in content strategy and in brand-driven content strategy for about almost 21 years now. And I was fortunate to come into it, I think, during kind of like the dot-com boom era, the boom and bust cycle. And that was an incredibly educational time, I think, as we saw how to start building the modern web and the components of it. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that I got to learn from so many people early on, because I was coming out of a program in design. My background is in design, into the content strategy team at Sapient. And that was kind of a wonderful crucible for learning from people, learning from mentors that had come into content strategy, maybe more from technical writing or library science or information architecture. We weren't yet talking about user experience design. And also, I don't know that it had yet evolved to the point of conflating so much with marketing, and content marketing wasn't really a thing yet. But we were, as I said, starting to shape how we create the modern web through front-end experiences that comprised design and information architecture and content strategy, sort of a three-legged stool of the front-end user experience. And it was around that time that we started looking at, well, how do we organize information on the back end? How do we push it out through content management systems? And also, ultimately, how do we take what different organizations have been doing for so long in their brick and mortar experiences and in offline print experiences? How do we bring that online? And that's kind of when you saw like the rise of brochureware, which, for better or worse, I think we all could learn from. And then looked at then how do we kind of drag that pendulum back in the other direction to say, it's not just about what brands want, what businesses want, but also about what their users need and expect from them in terms of communication and transactional flows. And started to inform more of that then with user research, to really frame it as user experience design. And that's kind of, I guess, kind of the tradition that I came up in then for looking at content strategy. And when I say that I practice brand-driven content strategy, it's because as I worked with different organizations at Sapient, and then I was in-house for a while at Timberland, and worked with, at this point in my career, several hundred different organizations across a wide variety of industries, from insurance to retail, consumer packaged goods, higher education, kind of all across the spectrum. And I've felt in every case that when brands are able to say, here's what we stand for, it allows them to differentiate from the competition, which is a service certainly to them and their in-house teams, but also to their prospective customers, or even for other B2B organizations. It's a way to say, here's who we are, here's how we're different, here's why you should associate with us. And now in researching how brands can shape our ability to trust, how they can foster trust, some of that is through the vulnerability of saying, here's what we are, here's what we're not, here's why you should choose to associate with us.
Wow. Can you give us the dictionary definition of content strategy. What exactly is it? Is it how we put all our contents, video, written format, or audio? Or, I mean, that's the idea that I'm getting, but I don't know. What is exactly content strategy?
Sure. Well, content strategy refers to planning for the creation, the aggregation, and governance of useful, usable, and appropriate content in an experience. So what do we need? Where's it coming from? Who's going to get it, or who's going to create it? And then how do we expire it out of a system? What do we do when it's no longer relevant in ways that support our users and support the organizations that are having to create and maintain and publish it?
Right. And then which vehicles are you, I mean, everything from print to audio to video? Is that what the voice?
Yeah, I would say when we look at what content comprises, as well as then where do we deploy it?
Right.
What does content strategy affect? I would say we think of it a lot in the context of websites, but also apps. Also, I would say print publications, and packaging. And when we look at kind of the broader ecosystem of touch points and the ways that organizations engage their end users, content exists on so many different surfaces and interfaces and experiences. And if we're doing it right in a way that is sustainable to the organization and consistent and relevant to their end users, then content strategy needs to take into account all of those touch points.
Right. I didn't think of apps as part of a content strategy. So I guess that's something that has been going on for the past maybe decade. Is that so? That would be a new way to deliver content. What are some of the vehicles that are being outphased, things that we don't see anymore? Maybe I don't know, those signs that you see in the highway, are they still relevant? Or
Well, yeah, I think all of those different platforms and channels remain relevant, even when a marketing department stops caring about certain sites and certain platforms. It doesn't mean that your audience has stopped caring about them. And I think that we see examples of that all the time when you see like a blog that launched with a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest, and then after 6 months, it's sort of like digital tumbleweeds are blowing through it. There are people in our audiences that notice that, and that's all stuff that I think detracts from the consistency and professionalism that a brand can otherwise offer.
Okay, so let's take this to the real world. Who is doing it right? Can you give us some examples of these companies doing a great content strategy, and this one is falling behind?
So I don't like to focus on the bad examples
Okay,
as much. And I think that that's something that you'll see in Trustworthy. I think that we can
right.
actually learn a lot more from rallying around organizations that are doing it well, because it's too easy to kind of jump on and point fingers at the ones that aren't doing it as well. But to that end, one of my favorite examples, and I use this a lot in Trustworthy, it's an organization that I sat down with and had some good conversations with, is America's Test Kitchen. It's a publishing organization that focuses on cooking and recipe development and kind of the science behind recipe development, as well as the science behind different kitchen tools, what works, what doesn't, and as well as specific ingredients, like what's the history of a particular spice, and what do we need to consider about maybe where it's sourced now, if it's from like a war-torn region, what do we need to think about there? And one of the reasons that I like focusing on America's Test Kitchen is because all of those different touch points that we were just talking about, like apps and what they're doing on Instagram and in print media and a television show and a website, they're doing all of that. They're quite the publishing empire. And I think what they've done well as far as their content strategy, as well as building trust across their content, is meeting users where they are. So whether you're a novice cook or you're somebody that's very, very skilled in the kitchen, you can find the right kind of information to help you self-educate and to help you feel more confident in both yourself and your own skills, as well as the organization that's helping you build those skills. And I think that's a core part of trust. And then as far as like the framework that I get into in Trustworthy around how we build trust by focusing on three separate things of voice and volume and vulnerability, America's Test Kitchen really nails all three categories really well. They've developed a consistent, cohesive voice over time. It's not just about kind of one particular ego or the voice of one chef, but they do allow individual voices to stand out as well. And they've built rapport in that way. I think we can learn from that.
Wow. But somehow I get the sense that trust and credibility seem to be under attack, especially now. Recently, we just finished an election in the United States, and it's people arguing against each other, claiming that you are right and you are wrong. And anyway, so from the perspective of a regular viewer, it seems like who can be trusted? And why is everyone ganging on credibility and the trustworthiness of the opposite party or the opposite brand?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. That's correct. I think I'd like to say coming out of a period of misinformation and disinformation. And we can kind of like smirk about that and say, let's hope that's over. But I think also so much of the choice and the opportunity to make sure it's over rests on the shoulders of people that are professional communicators, that are in marketing or design or content strategy and copywriting. I think we all have a role to play there, even if you work far outside of the realm of politics and media. Because you're right, I think coming out of an era that was rife with misinformation and disinformation and gaslighting, that has caused people's sense of cynicism to increase, where we start saying like, everybody lies, you can't trust anyone, everybody's out to sell something, don't trust any marketer. And that's a tough position to be in, especially when organizations are trying to sort of push information that isn't designed to sell anything, but maybe is designed to help people help themselves, to give them information about vaccination or about how to apply for and benefit from different government services. There's not really a negative agenda at play there, but people think there is. And I think that is in part due to this rise of cynicism. And when you have organizations that have been gaslighting the general public and saying, don't trust anyone but us, we're your only source of truth, everybody else is lying to you, don't even trust your own perceptions. Well, that's kind of the definition of gaslighting. Wow. When you're being told, like, don't trust the evidence of your own eyes and ears.
Wow. How about the role of business in society? I mean, from some economists, we get the idea that the role of business is just to produce value for the shareholders. But in this modern economy, we get the sense that the role of business is more than that. They have to look for every stakeholder there is. So what's at the end of the day, what's really the role of business?
I absolutely think that business can be a force for good. And I think when we see how people have lost faith, lost trust in a variety of large institutions, whether they're in government or large enterprises, there's absolutely an opportunity then for smaller brands or for brands far outside of the space of government to step into that void and say, okay, they've been working to destabilize your trust, to kind of build this sense of cynicism. Well, let's look at then what we can do to rebuild your sense of trust, to rebuild your sense of confidence in yourself and then hopefully the world around you. And I think the opportunity there for businesses is to look at how do we communicate? Can we communicate with more consistency and cohesion in what our brands look like and what they sound like, so that people have a sense of comfort and confidence that they know what we're going to be talking about, that they're not going to have to relearn a new interface or suddenly get up to speed with new jargon? Can we communicate in the right level of detail, the right volume of detail, so that people do feel knowledgeable and comfortable with their own level of knowledge so that they feel like they can make good decisions. Because I think it's by supporting that sense of confidence that businesses can really help people and help them bring that sense of confidence then into other interactions. And then I think when businesses also embrace the opportunity to be vulnerable, to say, this is what we stand for, they can kind of serve as a beacon to other organizations as well as to other individuals. And then I think there's also that other side of vulnerability when businesses say, here's how we messed up, or we got this wrong, but we're continuing to learn. And I think that is that's something that other businesses can learn from. And I think that that kind of dialogue also offers a model from which government can learn and public health officials can learn. Sometimes leaning into those mistakes is an opportunity to build confidence and rebuild trust.
Is that something difficult to do, to admit that, let's say, as a business, I did something wrong, and then be vulnerable in front of an audience, my clients, my whatever, and say, look, I screwed up here. I feel like people don't want to do that, and business is people as well.
Right. Businesses are made of people, and people have flaws and foibles, and also hope that we can continue to learn and grow. And part of learning and growing is being able to look back and say, I didn't know what I was doing back then, or I was making the best decisions I could with the information I had at the time, but now we have better information. So yeah, I think it can be hard for some businesses because it does require embracing that risk and weighing the risk and reward of saying, all right, if you admit to a mistake, does that then draw all of your critics and maybe stakeholders or shareholders? Does that draw their attention and draw their ire? Or is it an opportunity to say, we made a mistake, and then have other people lean in and say, okay, so how are you going to make it better? Show us how you're going to be accountable. And I think we see great examples of that from the likes even of Zoom, if we want to take the current platform as an example, where in December 2019, so a little over a year ago now, they had maybe 10 million daily users a day. They were primarily business users. They were supported by IT teams. They had security protocols in place, those business users, that were usually mandated by their IT teams. And then within just a few months, as the pandemic hit, we saw how suddenly businesses were mandating employees work from home. Suddenly schools were asking their students to work from home. We saw how preschool teachers and elementary school principals and so many more businesses were now all using Zoom. I think that at that point, by like March or April of last year, they were supporting some 90,000 different schools in 20 different countries, and their 10 million daily users jumped to 200 million daily users. Which, yeah, good problem to have, I guess. But they also saw then the rise of Zoom bombing and people having problems, security issues and whatnot. And they weren't all supported by IT teams that were like, hey, set a password, use the waiting room, things like that. And Zoom could have responded to that by saying, not our problem, you're doing it wrong, you're using it wrong. And instead, their CEO in early April released a blog post that said, yes, we need to do more. We need to do better. These are the problems we're seeing. Here's how we're going to improve. I apologize. So he apologized in the singular, gave credit to his team in the plural, and also said, here's how you can hold us accountable. First, we're going to roll out that all new meetings will require a waiting room to screen people. Here's how we're introducing other security measures and how we're taking our team and reassigning them to prioritize this work. And we'll have outside accountability reporting as well and outside reviews. Expect to hear from me about this once a week. So he apologized. It was a point of vulnerability that they turned into a strength. And he was entirely accountable. We can learn from that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Zoom is a great example, but there are other social media companies who say, we apologize, we made a mistake, we abused the confidence of our users. And then the following month, they they do even worse than they did before. So they violate the privacy of their users, they sell the information, and that brings the cynicism that many of consumers have. Like, wow, this guy, this CEO apologized to me last month, and today he's selling my information to somebody else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fool me once, shame on all of us at some point, and then fool me twice and I'm taking my business elsewhere.
That's
Or
right.
or what happens first is I'm taking my trust and faith
Mm,
elsewhere. And I think that that is such a problem, because when businesses do abuse the trust of their users, of their audiences, maybe not of their customers if they're actually selling their data to other people, but when they abuse that, that's what stokes our cynicism and it
right.
stokes our frustration. And it doesn't have to be like that.
Mm. Okay. Okay. So we have spoken on the spectrums of governments and big corporations. How about little content producers like myself? I produce a podcast, and I don't know, my friend down the block produce a blog. What can we do to uh, gain the trust of our audience? What can we do better as opposed to big businesses?
I think a lot of the same lessons apply, regardless of the scale of the organization. And you might actually be in a position where it's easier to build trust, easier than if you were at a larger organization that had a lot of different people creating content. And that's simply because the first thing that you can do, maybe the easiest thing to do, is to offer your audience consistency. Help them understand that they know what to expect from you. And that can be by doing things like offering content, maybe offering guests on your podcast that always kind of relate to each other or fit in a consistent model. It can also be through letting people have kind of an advanced perspective on what to expect. So in some organizations, that might mean sharing to some level the roadmap of here are products coming down the pike. If you publish a podcast, there's nothing wrong with offering people kind of a forward look on your editorial calendar so they know who they can expect to hear from in coming weeks. And I think this gets to the idea of vulnerability as well. There's nothing wrong with saying, here's what's coming up, but we said that we were going to be hearing from this person on this date, but we've had to push that out. Here's how we're tweaking things. It's okay for people to see how things are evolving. And I think that can be really empowering to your listeners or to blog readers to know what to expect from you.
Wow, Margot, you just improved my podcast by 10-20%. Okay, so the last question, I see behind you, you have the cover of your book. I wonder if you could reach out and tell us one more time the name, the title of the book, and where can listeners follow you as well?
Sure. Yeah, it's called Trustworthy. How Here, maybe I should pull it right out right here.
Yes.
Actually, things are going to fall if I do that. I
Okay.
won't do that.
Okay.
Trustworthy: How the Smartest Brands Beat Cynicism.
Okay.
Vulnerability in action. Gravity affects us all.
Fantastic.
I have another copy right here, though. So it's called Trustworthy: How the Smartest Brands Beat Cynicism and Bridge the Trust Gap. And you can find it everywhere books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, as well as lots and lots of small independent booksellers. So definitely support your local bookseller. It's available for pre-order now. And those pre-orders definitely support authors, but also help those small bookstores too.
Right. And where can people follow you?
You can find me on Twitter at @mbloomstein, as well as to find more information about the kind of work I do, research and trust. Sign up for my newsletter. If you go to appropriateinc.com/trustworthy, you can get information about the newsletter, pre-order, excerpts, all that good stuff.
Okay, so all that will be in the show notes. Margot, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This has been a real pleasure.